trading cards can be an absolute goldmine, just ask the Pokemon Company. And so, it is pretty understandable Fire Emblem 2 has tried to get its foot in the TCG door several times throughout its lifespan, although 0 are still alive and kicking today. The first go-around was all the way back in 2001, when Fire Emblem was still a Japanese-only franchise, of course. Simply titled Fire Emblem Trading Card Game, this line would last all the way to 2006, when the Blazing Blades release meant the series had gone worldwide for 3 years already, although the TCG never did. A very likely reason for that is the fact that the cards in this game were based entirely on Japanese exclusive games, being Genealogy of the Holy War, Phrasia, and the 2 Arcania titles. Because Guided doesn't exist, I guess. There were also never any tie-in cards released for the Binding Blade, despite that releasing when the TCG was only a year old. It's kinda strange that never ended up happening. The cards were produced by a company known as NTT Publishing, which is a subsidiary of one of the biggest companies in Japan, even bigger than Nintendo and Sony, NTT, which is a telecommunications company, so it may be a shock for you to hear that the Fire Emblem TCG is not how they earned their billions. Anyway, because this game was never localized and was pretty much out of the picture already by the time a Western fanbase for the series even had the time to be established, very little is known about the first TCG. For example, it is very difficult to find the rules of this game, which you would imagine is probably one of the most important things to preserve, but I guess not. I didn't give up that easily though, and found a website called FETCG.neocities.org, where a couple of Fire Emblem fans translated the rules using Google Translate. That probably means it isn't perfect, but hey, this is literally the only source on the entire internet stating how this game even works. I mean, according to the Fire Emblem wiki, no one in the English fandom knows how this game is supposed to be played, which I guess is not true. I won't bore you with the entire rule set, it's pretty long and sounds complex, but the idea is basically that you play on a small grid similar to a Fire Emblem map. The goal is to fill up your side of the map with units, so cards, and you win once you play a card that has the Seize ability. Sounds familiar, huh? Of course, you can also attack your opponent, which is another possible way to win. If your opponent runs out of units, they have been routed and you win. The game featured 6 different types of cards, and while all of them are of course based on the series, there is a lot more generic material here than you would ideally like to see. Among the units included are of course the playable characters from the games, all of them with new artwork that actually gave you a great look at what these characters were supposed to fully look like, which of course wasn't a given back when the games were sprite based. There were also units based on generic enemy classes, such as this Armor Knight, Priest and Barbarian. The second type of card were weapon cards, which featured all kinds from the series, ranging from standard weapons like the Iron Sword to legendary weapons like Gratifus and Falchion. Magic cards followed this same train of thought, but obviously used tomes and staves instead of actual weapons. Both of these cards could be equipped to a unit, as you might expect, but are not required to attack, as all units also start with base equipment, so to speak. Then there are also surprise cards, which is a bit of a grab bag of all kinds of things from the Fire Emblem games. Think scrolls that can allow you to use skills, but also characters that do something, like this Shannon card, which allows you to control one of your opponent's female units, if I understand it correctly at least. The last type of card are land cards, which was one that really drew my interest upon first finding that out. After all, we more often get good looks at old characters and weapons, but it's rare we get a good look at past locations from the series, and I was hoping these cards could provide some interesting insight. However, these are mostly generic, unfortunately. Or at least, I can't pinpoint church, desert and plains. It wouldn't be until the final set, focused on Mystery of the Emblem, that we'd get some canon locations, like Dragon's Stable or the Ice Dragon Temple, but they were few and far between. And so, I think it's fair to say the first Fire Emblem trading card game didn't exactly set the world, or Japan I guess, on fire, although it probably wasn't a complete failure either if it lasted 5 years. Following its cancellation, Japanese fan circles continued to make and distribute cards based on the free GBA games, but from what I can tell they stopped around the release of Path of Radiance. That doesn't mean this TCG has no legacy to speak of, however. Prior to Heroes, this TCG artwork was the best available piece of art for plenty of older characters, and for those who are yet to appear in the mobile title, it still is. Hell, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate actually features several spirits with artwork derived from this original TCG, such as Jagen, Draug, Bord, and Barst, Julius, Riss, and Medeus. So yeah, this TCG is represented in Smash, while Tokyo Mirage Sessions is not. Make it make sense. Well, that may have something to do with the fact the artists responsible for plenty of art pieces for the TCG are not exactly strangers to IS and Nintendo. Katsuyoshi Koya made the vast majority of the artwork for the game, including all pieces that made it into Smash. Koya worked on several Fire Emblem games around this time and was a graphic designer for Mystery of the Emblem, Genealogy of the Holy War, and also later Sacred Stones. Some of the earlier cards were drawn by Mayumi Hirota, who was the character designer of Freya 776 and might have been planned to do the rest as well until Sho Zukaga left Intelligent Systems and Hirota joined him to work on his new games. But arguably the biggest part of Fire Emblem TCG's legacy was the fact that later in the TCG's run, they hired an artist who was still in graphical school to draw some cards. That man was Yusuke Kozaki, and more than a decade later, IS would reach out to him again with the question whether he could design 60-odd characters for a little game called Fire Emblem Awakening, after which he would later also design the characters for Fates. And the cool thing is that if you look at the 3 cards he designed, Leaf, Luin and Sarah, it's actually really obvious that it's him. The style matches what we would later see in Awakening down to a T, despite being more than a decade earlier. And speaking of Fire Emblem Fates, it was around the release of this game in 2015 that a Fire Emblem TCG came to life again, after the original had stopped production in 2006. Fire Emblem Cipher benefited from the new spotlight on the series, although that still wasn't enough to get localized and released outside of Japan. Coincidentally, this TCG also had a run of 5 years, ending in 2020, but it produced a whole lot more cards in its time than the original TCG ever did. So much amazing art was made during this time. If you have a favorite character from a game pre-Engage, there is a big chance they featured in Cipher with some crazy good art. And that includes characters from games like Tokyo Mirage Sessions, Just Like Heroes, and even the first Fire Emblem Warriors, which to this day has not been represented in Heroes at all. It was undoubtedly this constant stream of amazing artwork that caused quite some recognition for Cipher in the West as well, to the point that even if you have never heard of Cipher as a Western fan, you have at least seen some of the artworks for sure. You've probably never played it though, and I must admit I haven't either, and compared to the first Fire Emblem TCG, I think it's fair to say it wasn't exactly dumbed down for easier access. It was definitely not a continuation though, as is occasionally parroted around online. The rules are completely different and it was developed and produced entirely in-house by Intelligent Systems. It's a completely different thing. That's not to say there aren't similarities, after all, they both aim to turn the Fire Emblem gameplay into a card game, but the differences are also strong. First of all, the game of Cipher is to defend your lord, not fill up your side of the map. Gone are also, well, every type of card that isn't a unit. Cipher only features cards with characters on them. No items, no weapons, no locations, only characters, which is definitely a good move. That's where the recognizability is after all. A whole bunch of new mechanics based on features that didn't exist in 2001 also come into play now, like class changes and support points. All in all, Cipher has a lot more to it than the original TCG had, but at the same time, I would say its gameplay is also a bit more intuitive and resembles other card games a lot more, which was probably for the best. What was arguably the wildest difference between the first TCG and Cipher is the fact that Cipher had its own original characters, just like Heroes would later have. Unlike Heroes though, Cipher didn't actually have any story to speak of, so all we really know about them is where they are from. Yeah, despite being nothing more than a name, a design and occasionally some flavor text, all these characters do have a Fire Emblem world of origin. They are not from a new location, like in Heroes. Let me introduce you to Valjean, an armored knight from Jugdrall, specifically Freya's version of Jugdrall. Niam from Tellius, who has a fierce rivalry with Poe, despite the fact Poe is actually from Fodlan. Yes, Poe could appear in Fortune's Weave, you heard it here first. She even has an Officer's Academy uniform. And then there's Alice, who actually doesn't have a world of origin at all, as well as a group of 4 you might actually be familiar with for a change. This is Emma, the first Cipher OC ever, and a Sky Knight from Hoshido. She travels through all kinds of worlds alongside her 3 allies, which are Yusu, a samurai from Hoshido, although she has a different class every time you see her, Shade, a dark mage from Nor, who is actually friends with the other 2 despite fighting for the opposite faction, and Randall, a paladin from Alib who somehow still knows these other 3. And the cool thing here is, these 4 have actually appeared in the game, as you might know. Shadows of Valentia, the first game released after Cipher came to be, introduced a DLC called Cipher Legends, which featured these 4 venturing into Valentia and encountering Alma Celica. Not only does that mean we got artwork for them in the beautiful Echoes art style and voice supports for these 4, this DLC was also released in the West, despite Cipher never actually doing so. The DLC is not exactly peak writing or anything, but it does a decent job of giving us a good impression of these completely unfamiliar characters, and it also knows well not to focus on Alma Celica too much and instead give a lot of screen time to these Cipher OCs. There is no way to know to what extent this DLC helped boost Cipher's numbers, nor is there any indication how well Cipher actually did. Intelligent Systems promoted the hell out of this game all throughout its life, that's for sure, but there is no denying that even if Cipher was a pretty good boost to their yearly numbers, it could never stand a chance against the flood wave of money that entered IS's bank account only 2 years after Cipher launched. A lot has been said about Heroes' role in the demise of Cipher, and it's easy to see why. They're both gacha-like games with plenty of new artwork to draw folks in, but also a fun way to use these characters if you so desire. One was just a gazillion times more profitable than the other. And yet, I don't think Heroes played such a big role in the demise of Cipher as people will occasionally say, for the simple reason that Cipher spent more of its lifetime alongside Heroes than it did without it. If Heroes was the Cipher killer, then it would have killed it much earlier than 2020, it's that simple. What is a little odd though is how Cipher featured plenty of cards for Heroes OCs, like the main trio, but also Veronica, while Heroes has never acknowledged Cipher even once. And to make matters even worse, Shade, Emma, Randall and Yutsu aren't even eligible for Choose Your Legends, despite literally appearing as playable units in a mainline Fire Emblem game. Sure, you can say that they were original characters from a trading card game exclusive to Japan, and you would be right. But at the same time, it feels kinda wrong that looking back, even though Cipher was so much cooler and more high profile than the original Fire Emblem TCG, its legacy is nearly non-existent. All we have are the artworks, but Cipher has no Smash representation, it doesn't even have Heroes representation. So all we can do now is wait until 2030, when the newest Fire Emblem character designer is revealed to have started with Cipher all those years back. What are your thoughts on Fire Emblem TCGs? Have you ever played them? And would you like IS to give it a fair try? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. If you really want to support me, you can now become a channel member to get all kinds of fun perks and help me keep bringing these videos to your doorstep every week. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.